In this video, I will be wrapping up the previous two videos where I am discussing the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. After that, I will present the most famous Eucharistic miracle the Catholic Church has to date. One that is well documented and next to impossible to deny. For those who haven't watched my previous two videos, I will put a link in the description. Okay, ready? Let's first start off discussing the Trinity. All Christians believe that God is both the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. All are one. And those who are non-Christian will sometimes ask, how can God be all three different things? And many of you will know the response is, it's the same way that water can be a liquid, a gas, and a solid. And let's keep that Trinity theme and expand on it with concepts in regards to the Eucharist. As far back as archaeologists can find, back 9,000 BC, when the world was polytheistic, or multiple gods, before it was monotheistic, belief in one God, there was always a similar concept in all the world religions. And the concept was sacrificing to a deity or a god, the god of water, the god of fertility. And the three main concepts were the deity, the priests that were provide the sacrifice, and the actual sacrifice, which was typically an animal. In regards to the Eucharist, that hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is that God or Jesus are all three as one. He is the deity. He is the high priest providing the offering or the sacrifice, and he is the sacrifice. When you attend Mass on a weekly basis, of course, it's given daily for those who attend on a daily basis. You are experiencing world history. You are experiencing a sacrifice done by a deity, a priest, and the sacrifice. But all three of them are one. And a common question that will come up for Catholics and non-Catholics is the question, are we sacrificing Jesus every single time we perform the Eucharist sacrament? And the answer from the Catholic Catechism is no. It's the same sacrifice. Why? Because it's done by the same deity, it's done by the same priest, and the sacrifice is always the same thing. It's one. So it's only one sacrifice being performed, and it's been being performed for 2,000 years, the exact same sacrifice. Many people ask, are we sacrificing Jesus on a daily basis? No, it's the same sacrifice. And going back to the book dedicated to the Levite priests, the book of Leviticus, I spoke about three different sacrifices. Those were the Day of Atonement, the Thanksgiving offering, and the food offering. And again, here we find that the Eucharist is all three of those combined into one. It's one, the sacrifice to atone for the sins. It's two, the thanksgiving. That's why the priest raises up and gives thanks, just as Jesus did in the feeding of 5,000. He rose the bread up and gave thanks, as well as the memorial for his name. In addition to that, it is the food offering to God, which I spoke about in Leviticus, which keeps the covenant with God. However, Jesus replaces that old covenant with his new covenant. This is the new and everlasting covenant. Luke chapter 22, verse 20. When I discuss the eating requirements in Genesis chapter 3 and the forbidden fruit, Exodus chapter 12 in the Passover lamb or Passover meal. And John chapter 6, Jesus being the bread from heaven. Those were all eating requirements that we discussed. And just like the Trinity, the Eucharist is all three of those things. In Genesis, the forbidden fruit. Jesus' blood is the wine from the vine. John chapter 15, he calls himself the vine, and his Father the gardener, and we are the branches. He is also the Passover lamb. John calls him that. St. Paul calls him that, which we are to eat. He is also the bread from heaven, and we read that in John chapter 6, verse 55, he said, "For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink." The reason why you should believe in the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is because it fulfills Bible prophecy. The Eucharist is the essence of the Bible. As Pope John Paul II called us, we are the Easter people. We are in communion with God, one body. As Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, verse 13, one baptism for one body. Okay, let's get to that miracle that I spoke about in the beginning of the video. The Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano. In 700 AD, a monk was struggling with the belief in the Eucharist being the true presence of God. And he kept praying to God for proof or for a miracle. And it happened. When he was consecrating the body and blood on the altar, the host turned to living flesh, and the blood, or the wine, turned to living blood. And unfortunately, nothing ever comes from this. It's not really talked about. It's kept in the church, and people know what it is, but it's not widespread until the Middle Ages, when nobles and popes and bishops start visiting this church, asking about this host, which is still around, and this blood. That's when it starts to get famous. People start writing about it. There's an epitaph. But that's when the world finds out about this host that turned to flesh. And you can imagine their preservation techniques were just awful. Everyone who comes in is touching it, they're feeling it, they're looking at the blood, swishing around, they keep it in this cabinet. And it's another miracle that we still have it. But we do. And it's still on display. And in 1970, the Catholic Church allowed for scientists to look at this, a few of them. Just very much like they allowed the Shroud of Turin to be examined by scientists in 1977. And what these scientists found out about this host in the blood is they found out that it is really human flesh. In fact, it's a part of a human heart, and that the blood is real human blood. It's type AB. And skeptics have all wondered how the heck it is that we have kept this thing from the Middle Ages, because they want to say that this hoax was performed in the Middle Ages, whereas in the Middle Ages they say this came from right around 700 AD. And it is a miracle that we still have this thing and it's still on display. But it shouldn't be too much of a shock for Christians, seeing as though no one can explain the Shroud of Turin or many of the other miracles that we have. So I will conclude this Eucharist trilogy that I did, hoping that you enjoyed it. If you did, I would hope that you would hit that like button, because the more likes, the more people will hear about the Eucharist. Next up, I'm going to discuss the Mass and break it down into simple terms that people can understand. So if you're a subscriber to this channel, hit the bell. I'm not sure when I will complete my next trilogy or whatever it may be. And if you're not a subscriber, I would love for you to subscribe, but certainly I appreciate all of you watching this video. Thank you.